This week, I had the absolute pleasure and privilege of spending time with Jarrod McKenna, pastor, activist, and globally recognised non-violent social change trainer. To use Jarrod's own words, throughout this conversation, you won't necessarily get to know more about him, but all of him is present throughout the conversation. From the start, we get into covering numerous ideas, issues and topics that range from the state of Australian national identity, being real about what's going on around us and acknowledging the canary birds in our society. What is grace? The number of questions Jesus posed throughout the Bible. The value of engaging, considering something bigger than yourself and taking stock of who you actually look up to shape your desires. And there's so much more in this conversation. This conversation will stretch and expand your perspective in all sorts of directions. I myself was impacted by this and was deeply reflecting on this conversation for a number of days afterwards. Like I said, it was a true pleasure and privilege to speak with Jarrod and be in the presence and energy of a man who truly lives by his beliefs. So enjoy Jarrod. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host, Bryn Edwards. Living by what you believe in, sticking your head above the parapet, and following your faith into something much, much bigger than just yourself. And just some of the things I'm sure we'll be exploring today with my guest, Jarrod McKenna. Jarrod, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bryn. Good to be with you.
Yeah. Super thrilled to have you on the show, so thank you very much for
this is fun.
sharing your time.
Glad we can be. Sorry it's taken a little bit of time.
That's all right.
We got there.
We did. So you're a Perth boy, born and bred, that's correct?
Born and bred, yeah. Born in Subiaco.
Yeah?
Grew up initially in Balcatta, then Churchlands. Yeah.
Superb. One of the questions I always ask my guest is, what was it like growing up in WA? Considering I only moved here 9 years ago.
Yeah, right. So I'm an 80 baby. That makes me 38 at the moment, even though towards the end of 80. So Perth in the 80s. I was primary school at Churchlands Primary, high school at Hale, and then St Stephen's for my last couple of years, and they were all really positive experiences for me. I mean, it's that whole thing that fish don't know they're wet, right? So when it's your experience, it wasn't until living overseas and working in aid, development and relief that have seen a lot of things and realising now that Perth is like an extraordinary place to bring up kids. Or Fremantle. I made that cardinal sin of somebody from Perth being in Fremantle. I should also mention Fremantle, as it's not the same thing. But yeah, WA in general is beautiful growing up for me on Wadjuk land of the Noongar people, and it's an incredible privilege to be part of the beauty of this place and the biodiversity of WA and what the beach means and what the hills mean and what it is to be here is something very special, I think.
Did you get out and about in nature much while you were young?
Yeah, it was important to me as a kid. Like, in fact, my parents talk about that I wouldn't go to sleep as a kid, and I don't know whether it was just delay tactics or whatever, Bryn, unless they would take me outside so I could say "Night night moon, night night stars." Wow. And I am at my best when I have a sense that, you know, we're a part of everything else. Our English language isn't helpful for that. We use words like nature, or people refer to me as an environmentalist, and it always others. And yet the tradition that I'm from says that we're all part of creation, that we're all in this together, this dance that is life, this mystery we can't think of merely as humans, but what about the other than human parts of reality? And so I'm at my best after bushwalks and after surf and after time, you know, just listening to the songs of birds and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. Would you call yourself a proud West Aussie, or?
I mean, you know, how a place expresses itself as an Australian I find really interesting. So
it's kind of what I asked you.
My dad migrated here in the 70s. He was born in Northern Ireland, and my mum's family, although Russian Jewish ancestry, have been on the east coast of Australia, and Victoria in particular is where my mum grew up. And I even think since I was a kid, the way that Australians relate to what it is to be an Australian has changed. I remember being in primary school and we were redesigning the flag, and something happened under the Howard years after September 11th where we started to consider the flag in ways that feel much more American than they do what previously was Australian.
How does that show up?
Together already. Like I think in some of its most ugly thing, you take the Cronulla riots, or you take just even some of the ugly stuff of trying to be with friends and family to watch fireworks on January 26th, which some of us refer to Invasion Day or Survival Day or Australia Day, and seeing people wear it as a cape, and those incidents of people saying kiss the flag, and that's very weird for a place where, you know, the story of Australia is we were either colonised, colonisers, convicts, immigrants or refugees, right? That's all of us. Yeah. And for a lot of us, we've only been here for like a blink of the eye. That's right. Like compared to 60, 70, 80,000 years, like the First Nations people of this continent. And yet the lack of humility and the lack of, well, it seems like a complete amnesia. So I've been thinking about it a lot since, you know, the horror of the terrorist attack in Christchurch and the fact that the terrorist was an Aussie, and what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for me? What does it mean? You know, we live in such individualized societies that we're quick to say, oh, it's not my fault. Like, you know, it's one quote unquote lone wolf, or
well, it's easy to think like that because then it's him, not me.
Totally right.
And that makes me feel safe and better about myself.
It means that I don't have to look
connected to him.
Yeah. One of the big influences on me has been Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is thought to be the greatest Jewish theologian of the 20th century. Survived the Holocaust, moved to America, worked with Martin Luther King, and reflecting on the Holocaust and the horror of 6 million people in, you know, what was one of the most sophisticated, cultured, intellectual nations on the European continent, Germany, and yet this kind of scapegoating expressed itself so murderously as the reality of the gas chambers. As Heschel talks about that few are guilty, yet all are responsible. And I find that fascinating. I find what that means to think, okay, we're just like we were talking about, you know, creation, that we're not just atomized, individualized, but societies. I know Margaret Thatcher hated the idea of like society, like, but if we do actually belong to each other, if there was no way through this other than with each other, if there is no them, only us, we have to look at this stuff. Like we actually have to deal with this stuff. And I think the tragedy is that we're maybe moving to a brittle understanding of what it is to be Australian that expresses itself in fear instead of what we could be. Like we live on land that has been, you know, it sustained by the oldest living cultures in the world, and yet it plays such a little reality in so many Australians' understanding of themselves, and I think that's a tragedy. I think often people such as yourself, Bryn, who are coming from elsewhere, will have a deeper appreciation for that than those whose families have been here a couple of generations. But I think the conversation is changing, and
it strikes me that there's this huge, deep wealth of knowledge that could so easily be tapped into.
Yeah.
I went to South America during the late 90s.
Wow.
And there you could see and feel the impact of the conquistadors.
Yeah, totally.
But you could still see and feel this huge, deep well of
that's
knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess part of my drive, which expresses itself in the podcast and many other things I do, is, all right, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've got it all figured out. You know, I am work in progress. I am figuring it out. I am work in progress. I know so little.
Yeah.
But success leaves clues. And we can go and look at what works and take bits out of here. I mean, you know, on a selfish basis, all of these podcasts are me being nosy into other people's lives to find little nuggets of gold, which I myself can take on board and go integrate into my life and go execute.
Yeah.
And then I share it as well.
Yeah.
And that's the altruistic part of me. And then the sharing normally brings guests in as well. So there's a bit of a second there. But yes, it strikes me that we have, even here in Australia, a huge wealth of knowledge. I was fortunate enough to speak to Richard Wally on the show, and just again I got the sense of being able to tap into a very deep well of knowledge, and the fact that he put forward a very simple but calm point, which was 250 odd years ago, when everybody else turned up, we didn't need government, we didn't need prisons, we didn't need all the infrastructure. We were all living quite harmoniously with the land.
Yeah.
And then that was it. Go think on that one.
Yeah.
And that was really quite deep.
Oh, totally.
And then again at the other level, you talk about what it means to be Australian. I'd agree that I can see similarities between Australia and America. And the first time I came here was 1996. No, 1994. And it seemed like a very free and easy place to be, where you could define yourself however you wanted to. And something has changed along the way.
There has been a shift, hasn't there?
There has definitely been a shift along the way. And, as I mentioned to you before, we started this, I went and did a neurolinguistic programming course. And one of the wonderful things, bits of knowledge where I can place things now, is this idea that we have behaviours, then we have thoughts, we have belief patterns, we have values, and when we have a sense of identity, and then above that is a sense of purpose. And it almost strikes me that there's I want to say a crisis at the identity level.
Yep.
But the crisis is, you can call it a crisis if you want, but it's kind of needs to happen in terms of, at the end of the day, I moved from one. On one level, I call myself a proud Englishman, especially when the rugby team rolls out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I love it. But then at another level, I left England.
Yeah.
And administratively, I'm a citizen of Australia as well.
Yeah. And
at one level, I understand my roots and where I came from and how that shaped me. But the other end of the scale, I don't care. And so in not caring, I can define my own identity. And to kiss the flag and all this, that, and the other, I sort of get it, but at the other level, it just holds you back. And I could see how, well, if I haven't got the flag, what else have I got?
Yeah, and that's the tragedy of it, I think.
You've got so much.
Yeah. And, to go back to your question, am I a proud sandgroper? Am I a proud West Australian? If you mean what Tim Winton means, where he, through the poetry of his writing, for me, it's actually about location. It's about connection. It's about the story of this place, and to tell the last 2 minutes of a story is to miss all the story. And that's the tragedy of some of the brittleness around Australian identity at the moment, is that the easygoing, sun-loving larrikins that we're thought of internationally, it has changed. And I think it's because we haven't dealt with our nation's original sin of like colonization and genocide. And because of that, we can't deal with how that expresses itself. The first week of Parliament in 1901, we passed White Australia policy. And we are still living in the aftermath of the trauma that history causes. And I think it expresses itself in how we welcome those who are seeking safety. And the fact that it's just such a political football means that we can't approach it with the kind of humility you were expressing, Bryn. Socrates talks about the beginning of wisdom is not knowing, but not knowing. And it's the awareness of not knowing that we can actually... we become inquisitive. We become people of like wonder and awe and inquiry, and there's a sense of wanting to go deeper. Last night, my gorgeous little family were around at friends' places, and Nick's a Wurundjeri woman, and we just spent the whole night just telling stories. And at the end of it, she said, as we were going home, for my mob, we yarn so we can heal. And I think the importance of, WA Real and the work you're doing is, it's great if people can have like little tools and ways of packaging this kind of stuff, but we're narrative beings. The stories we tell determine how we are in the world, how we feel about ourselves and others, and
the story you tell yourself is how you define yourself.
Yeah. And identity flows out of story, not the other way around. I think this is the work that there is to do. And so something that is more grounded here, that has a longer memory, that isn't scared to actually take responsibility, but knows that transformation comes from looking at this stuff and having the courage to take responsibility instead of deal in cover-ups and self-propaganda and that kind of fragility, so that we could be what we can't yet imagine, but is possible. It is possible for Australia to be leaders of compassion in the region, instead of what we're currently doing in terms of our immigration policy, or what we're currently doing in terms of the incarceration of First Nations people in our prisons and those kind of realities. But if we can't have identities that open us in humility to larger stories, we will always resist that. People will press pause on a podcast and look for something else.
Yes.
Because it asks of something that we fear, if our heart opens to this, it might not be able to hold it. And I think the irony is, Bryn, that maybe our hearts can't hold it, and that's the point, that it's only the heart that can expand under the reality of this, that this stuff can flow through, and we can actually move into something we can't yet imagine.
Yeah. I really like how you put that, particularly based on your heart, which is a theme that turns up in a lot of these podcasts.
Yeah, right.
Opening your heart and being heart-centered. It's very easy, nouveau, to say that, but the way you just put that there is, quite practical, quite tangible to understand.
Yeah.
I had a lady called Jan Rodder on the show quite a while back, and we talked about environmentalism and looking after the environment and this, that, and the other. And the biggest thing she said was, the most difficult thing is most people know that we need to do something.
Yeah.
But then when it goes beyond that, it gets all scary, and it's all, well, that means I'm involved and I'm responsible, and what does that impact? And press pause, I'll go off and do something else. And there are so many areas where we do so quickly, and it's so easy to distract ourselves with, I'll go and do something else.
Yeah.
It used to be like, we'll do the cleaning or something out, but now it's just pick up your mobile.
Yeah,
phone.
Twitter.
Twitter, Facebook, there you go, bang. An hour later, it's time for bed. I didn't have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of that is even cleaning is an action that places us back in our bodies. Our inability to actually be to live from our heart and to live in our bodies, that we outsource with we outsource our pain to forms of escapism, because we do fear that it's too much for us. And part of that is that so many of us lack real community. We might have a larger network which we hang out with, work with, like professional colleagues and friends from the footy team or the yoga group you're part of, or whatever it might be. But so many of us actually lack the kind of community where we can hold these things together. And so when tragedy does hit, either personally or collectively, my mate Nadia talks about how, your yoga teacher isn't always the one who's going to come around just with a casserole because you're in so much pain that you can't think about dinner tonight. And yet we do need those kind of communities where it isn't based on transaction, but a sense that transformation is us in this together. And we're as important as professional boundaries are, and they really are. That's only sustainable if we have larger communities where we can be vulnerable and have spaces to express we're living through an unprecedented ecological crisis that 1.4 million high school students went out on the streets to draw our attention to last week, and yet it's business as usual on Monday.
And we're also going through an epidemic of anxiety, clinical anxiety and depression.
And we act as if it's unrelated.
And while I applaud the "Are you okay?" at the other end of the scale, it's like, "Are you okay?"
No, I'm not.
No, I'm not. All right, where am I going now?
Let me give you a helpline.
Let me give you a helpline. Yeah. Dial.
Yeah.
It's like, cool. Outsource it.
Yeah.
And from an economic point of view, the whole world is leveraged to hell, and the central banks are leveraged, and
on a myth, like we're not even like there's not even a gold standard, which we are,
that went ages ago in the 70s.
Yeah, we're trading on. That's right. We're trading on ideas that, theologically, it's a complete Gnostic reality. So Gnosticism was expressed in Christian theology as a heresy that longs to be saved from all of reality instead of longs for the saving of all reality. And so our economic systems are based on nothing that is real. Nothing. We think that success for us is so often defined by limitless choices instead of what are the right limits of a good and grounded life, where I'm in community with others in ways that we can actually depend on one another in ways that are interdependent instead of dependent. And we find it hard to even imagine those things. So economically, we can't think of our way out other than, some larger entity, whether it be the state or the market, will save us.
I think I saw a fantastic documentary by, I've got to get the right Curtis here, because one wrote this documentary and the other one wrote Love Actually.
Right.
It's Richard Curtis, I can't remember.
Right.
Anyway, he did this documentary called Hypernormalization, which kind of looked at what was going on it started off with looking at what was going on in Russia before the fall of the wall, and then how that impacted and how everyone knew deep down it was all screwed up. But they carried on regardless with this beautiful blind sight because they didn't know what else to do. I one of the podcasts I'd like to have, and I think I'm about ready to do it, is I would like to talk to someone about politics, because not left or right, I'm not actually interested in that.
Sure.
It's more the case of, you vote someone in for 4 or 5 year stint, they're only going to have a 4 or 5 year horizon.
That's right.
So screwed.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so true.
One of the most beautiful counter stories to that that I read once was in the Great Hall at Cambridge, in one of the dining rooms in one of the colleges there. I think it's New College. I can't remember. Anyway, they had these lovely wooden beams, right, made out of a particular tree, and let's just arbitrarily call it oak. And it got to the point about sort of, what was it, 15, 20 years ago, where they were decaying and they were coming to pieces. And it's like, we're really going to have to replace them. And then it's like, well, we've got to replace them with the same stuff because, we're the same college. With the college, Cambridge, all of that. So they sort of said, well, we're going to have to source where we can get some similar beams from, this, that, and the other. And somebody just took the time to go and speak to the groundsman about the different trees that they had on the grounds. And the groundsman said, we've been waiting for you for 200 years.
Wow, incredible.
These are the trees that we planted. These are the trees that we planted when the hall was built for the next level for the next beams.
Wow.
So the groundsman have been handing that on year on year on year for 200 odd years.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. Now that's some thinking.
Yeah. Well, the monks up at the New Norcia Monastery, they have a 500-year plan. I find that, like, well, what is it to think of our lives in terms of what will our great-great-grandchildren think about how we spent our time?
Yeah.
We're living at this unique moment in history where we have access to resources that won't go on forever, that we haven't had access to forever.
Yeah.
And so how are we using them, and how will future generations actually think about what we're doing and how we're spending our time? And I think the reason why so many people are tired of politics isn't that people... I mean, for Plato, the classic understanding of politics is how one organises society. I think most people are interested in that. Like, what is it to actually organise society in such a way that it's life-giving and there is a concern for the common good. And there are different approaches to that, but I think most people are interested in that. What most people have no time for is the tribalism.
Yes.
That it expresses itself as much of party politics, where it is this career-orientated, short-term thinking about election cycles instead of the sense of what we could be and how do we have a vision given what we're going through, and instead of the kind of the harshness or the pat answers that we respond to this crisis that you're talking about in terms of mental health issues at the moment, where we act as if it's like all these problems are located in individuals. Part of that, again, is that we don't have the kind of holistic thinking that we can see these, we are the canaries in the mine. Like and I think those of us who are more sensitive are those who are often hit the hardest by it as well. And instead of seeing these people as being a drain on the economy, realizing that our priority is wrong, and like economics is to support a life, not life for economics.
Correct.
And rather than these people being a drain, these vulnerable parts of our community are actually indicators that we're not well. Not they're not well. We're not well. And if we can approach it like that, and I think for me, Bryn, a lot of these, this lesson in particular came from like years of being a carer for people with disabilities, and realizing the incredible gift those who get relegated as not being functioning members of our market-driven society are actually the ones that call us to what it is to be alive. Not in sentimentalized kind of ways, in all the awkwardness and pain of what it is, but also the joy and the simplicity and the beauty that we need each other. And what we need from each other is actually far less complicated than we make it. My dad likes to talk about how attention is another word for love.
Yeah.
And the importance of actually being present with another person, acting like people aren't a means to an end, but this is life right now, and this is somebody of inherent value, and there is a dignity inherent in all of humanity. And what is it to be present to one another in such ways that even while somebody is like going off, that we can be present in such ways to receive that it actually doesn't continue that cycle for them, that they're actually heard. And I think we all need that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We do it as parents. If you want to punish kids, just tensions off them.
Yeah, which I almost wonder is more cruel, right? Like, yeah.
Give someone the cold shoulder. Whew.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost more nasty, isn't it? Like those dynamics where you're in an office and instead of dealing with a conflict where somebody avoids or looks past, or in a meeting and you become invisible,
yes.
you'd rather somebody like call you or whatever. Yeah. But almost we've lost the technology of how to do conflict in such ways that we see conflict as a gift rather than a curse. And see, we used to talk about conflict resolution, and the conflict studies now talks about conflict transformation, because we shouldn't see conflict as something that is a bad thing that needs to be resolved, but conflict is actually an opportunity that opens us up to listening more deeply to what we need and what others need, and how do we actually meet those in ways that, the early 90s management language was win-win, right? Like,
yes.
How do you look for win-win situations, which I actually think is about how do we practice nonviolence, not merely as the absence of violence, but some of my mentors have schooled me in it's the presence of a power that is more powerful than force, and that's a very different conversation. Its concerns isn't like the whole egg boy thing. I found it fascinating, people's responses and the disproportionate responses to a larrikin kid not throwing an egg, he just smacked it on the back of a head. And I'm not saying it's a great tactic, nor am I saying it's transformational.
You go back into,
Aussie history. That's
right. Go back
right.
into English history.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, rotten tomatoes.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, the reason why we actually
part of the game.
have a federal police force is because in 1917 in Queensland, while Billy Hughes, the then Prime Minister, was trying to do a drive for the yes conscription for World War One, somebody threw an egg at him. And so like there is this long tradition of... but I found it fascinating.
Egg and a poly.
Egg and a poly. Like, and I just found it fascinating that people were equating... Like I just saw this ridiculous commentary where people were like, well, this is where terrorism starts, like this is violence as well. And there's no symmetry between the kids in Dondale like actually wrecking the place because their childhood is literally imprisoned in Dondale, and the violence of Dondale itself, or Palestinian kids chucking rocks as military vehicles rumble through their streets, or like... If we can't see the larger context, we'll end up moralizing instead of like actually diagnosing what is this and how do we get to the root of this, and what then transforms instead of... Rumi has this beautiful poem where he talks about there's a field beyond right and wrong, I'll meet you there. And I think often the moralizing of right and wrong, where again, it's about a fragility of identity. Am I good or am I bad? We just need to grow up. Like, it's like, what is the good that we're seeking? What is the direction we're moving? Realizing we're all in this together. People in prison don't go away. So what's prison going to be that it's actually something that transforms or gives the opportunity for people to actually transform, rather than merely understandings of punishment which are punitive. And I think there are experiments we can do as parents. I think there are experiments we can like do as friends, and the ability to actually be vulnerable, I don't think starts out with being, I'm a good person, but actually starts with, I'm part of the problem.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been to AA or Narcotics Anonymous or knows that, it's one of the first steps. And I think it's the first step we all need to take at the moment, given this ecological crisis and where things are headed.
Because to just focus on, I had this in my life where I was like, I'm a good man, I do this, and I do this, and I look after the family, and then all of a sudden, I found myself doing some weird and wonderful behaviour, and all the wheels came off my life, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, I'm not good,
Yeah.
And then I went very much into the shadow part of myself.
Yeah.
And then where I've come to now is that, like you said, I am both good and bad. I'm generous and stingy.
That's right.
I'm energetic and lazy.
Yeah.
I am all of me.
Yeah.
And, I want to ask you about, because you're a pastor.
I am.
And we haven't even got to that bit yet. It's been great.
Not a paid pastor, and I've only had 2 years of my life, and I've been in ministry since I was 18, where it's been my source of income.
Right.
Which I have started telling people, because I think people have often thought, oh yeah, that's a career like any other. But for me, that's not what it's about. I've worked as a trainer for activists for groups like Greenpeace, and I was the national advisor for faith and activism for World Vision Australia, and a consultant for World Vision New Zealand, and worked for World Vision Middle East, Eastern Europe as their consultant for nonviolent social change. But yeah, for me, pastor isn't so much a role, and certainly not a title. When people call me pastor so-and-so, I'm like, it's...
Pastor Jarrod.
Yeah, I think pastoring, it's a agrarian metaphor. It's to do with sheep. It's
because it comes from the Latin word to shepherd.
To shepherd, exactly. Yeah. Like it's to care, and so either it's something you do, but calling somebody a pastor doesn't make them somebody who cares for people's souls and well-being. Like,
they kind of got to do that for themselves to start with, to help them on the journey,
which is part of the journey. Yeah.
Actually, one of the things I wanted, because you brought out some of the stuff that you've done, I always get, still to this day, I get nervous before doing a podcast.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, to me it means something. It's always like, oh, am I going to do this like energy in this conversation proud and I go through that beforehand, and I had quite a bit of it before you came, because I thought, wow, right.
Well, you're ever the professional, because I couldn't tell it all. Bryn.
Thank you. I go through a bit of preparation, just try and minimise it all. But and I look back at who are the ones that really get me in the same level of nervousness beforehand, and it's always people who are willing to go there. And I do the bunny ears around the go there. Yeah. Those who are willing to probably stick their head above the parapet, and live their beliefs and do that. Where does that come from in the Jarrod stuff?
To go back to what you were saying before, Bryn, and I really appreciate, like, not just your honesty with me, but like with your listeners, which I think is probably the reason why you've got the listenership you do, is because you allow people in. I think when we respond, I'm a good person, I'm a good person, I'm a good person, it's because we are so fearful of the stuff that we clearly know isn't that.
Yeah.
And there is a goodness that underlies, I believe, what we do, both good and bad. That there is a Thomas Merton, who has been a big influence on me. He talked about the immortal diamond. That there is something in us of such value and worth, and part of the good person games. And religion is a wonderful place to A, hide from God, and B, play good person games. Where it's a form of self-propaganda, where seeking to find worth, we prop ourselves up against others and use religion as a way of, well, I was in church 3 times this month, so I'm better than or
Yeah.
I attended synagogue this week, or I've been to mosque for prayer on Fridays, this many. And all of that is a massive distraction from what those spaces...
real work.
from doing the real work.
Yeah.
And as you talked about, like in terms of the shadow, Carl Jung, like in terms of Jungian psychology, he said that 90% of the shadow is gold.
Yeah.
If we can actually own that which we suppress and deny about ourselves, that's where the real energy of who we are actually is. And I think I'm not interested in an activism which is more woke than thou.
Yeah.
For me, I am so... And the older you get, the more you know of yourselves and how complicated we all are, and the things we do and what motivates, and the things that we do and we're not even sure what motivates, both good and bad, that there has to be a deeper sense of mercy and kindness to ourselves, of patience with ourselves, than these games of am I good enough? Or pretending that life is somehow a wager of bad weighed up against good, and these ridiculous notions that don't do justice to the Jewish and Christian notions of what spirituality is, but they also do harm to our souls. Like it's bad theology, even if you don't believe in the God that animates the theology you believe.
Yeah.
Which is a subtle thing. Sometimes Bryn, people are like, "Oh, I don't believe in God." I'm like, "Tell me about the God you don't believe in." And they start, this male deity at a distance in the sky, judging people with a beard, and who's naughty and who's nice. And I'm like, it sounds like Santa. Like, I don't believe in that God either.
Yes.
Like, I'm not sure what any of that. But bad theology is bad for us. Bad philosophy is bad for us. And the question becomes, what...
Bad meaning...
nasty?
Yeah.
However we ultimately understand reality, if you want to put the big G to that term, or not, may or may not be helpful. If we think the world or the universe is ultimately out to get us, we will live scared, fragile,
scared,
inward-looking, brittle lives. If we think the nature of all that is actually competitive and vindictive, that's how, I think we become what we worship. And people are like, I don't worship anything. And it's like, where have we spent our time?
Yeah.
How have we spent our money? Where do we learn our desires from? And I think that, Bryn, is key. If we can identify who are the people that I look up to who actually teach me what to desire, and are those desires actually moving us in the direction of healing and wholeness and a groundedness, or are they moving me in a direction of us against them, like the envy, the dehumanizing, the using others, the manipulation, that reveals what we worship, regardless of whether we believe in a deity or
in
not.
God or
exactly
the most near term.
Yeah, and the biblical sense of idolatry is those self-created things that we give our life to that aren't big enough to hold the mystery of compassion that delivers.
Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, idolatry, like the worship of idols, and the biblical, both Jewish and Christian wisdom witness to the reality that idols are that which we give our lives to that we create that aren't big enough to hold the mystery of a compassion that delivers, of a love that actually liberates, of that which we struggle to put language around. What I'm talking about is what we talk about when we talk about God.
Yeah.
I'm trying to give people permission to go, there might be stuff to learn here, even though I'm not a God botherer.
Yeah.
And if we can identify those things that animate our lives, that self-awareness, I think, can be so incredibly helpful in being able to be kind to ourselves, to actually see the stuff that we don't want to show others, let alone look at ourselves.
I think, yeah. Do you find that, would say that the recent Catholic scandal that came out, that gives a lot of people this cheap and easy way to go, oh well, religion, it's all
yeah.
So I'm going to just chuck it out, and therefore that gives me a free pass.
Yeah.
Not to think about something bigger than myself.
Yeah.
Not to think about it. I mean, I was shuffled along to Baptist Sunday school as a kid, right? With my grandparents, because Mum and Dad wanted a bit of time off on a Sunday morning, right? It's pretty obvious.
Good for them.
Yeah, so I used to go and sing the hymns, and then we used to go and do an hour or so of this was up until about the age of 8 when I went off to school. I loved it. I loved the stories.
Yeah.
I loved the stories.
Yeah.
Parables and songs and da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
I freaking loved it. And from that, there's always been a sense of, there is something way bigger than me. And I've been all good with that. And, I've explored it in lots of different ways along my journey. But, look, it's easy to go and have a chat about footy and shit like that times. But it's how do we hold people to have a discussion that's safe and easygoing, or at least you can enter into? Because it strikes me that if we could at least consider something that's bigger than ourselves, then we can start getting to that compassion for others and the fact that we are all connected and we're all part of it. Because while we keep it all me and maybe me and my castle and the people that live in it, and outside of my castle, it's them. It's how do we sort of enter into that, and certainly stuff like the recent scandal doesn't help.
Yep. And like a couple of things, I'm very aware that a lot of people get enough religion to hate, and never enough to love. And to also say that it's not a prerequisite for being human and or for being involved in seeking justice in the world, or the kind of arrogant proposition that unless you're, again, it goes back to that ego game of how do I create this self-identity of being a good person, instead of what it actually does is it relativizes all identities. And I actually think that rather than giving people an excuse, there is something so true to faith itself to be horrified at, and it's not just the Catholic Church, it's right across churches, and it's not just Christianity, it's right across different religions, and it's not just different religions, it's right across society. We could be talking about the swim team, we could be talking about scouts, we could be talking about schools. There is an epidemic of child sexual abuse, and one of the things that is different about how it shows up in churches is the access and the records, and the fact that it comes with this added layer. I think that's why people are horrified, Bryn, of hypocrisy. It's you might know 30 seconds of something about the life of Jesus, or just the basics of I've seen the Prince of Egypt, isn't your God about freeing slaves? Even if that's your only experience, you're what the hell is this? It's even worse than the Scouts, or because it's supposed to be like, you know,
up here.
Exactly. Like, isn't this
Yeah.
supposed to call us to more? Isn't this supposed to?
Yeah.
And so when supposed leaders who, like, a culture which does cover up in terms of sexuality and then scapegoats those who are same-sex attracted or don't fit into a heteronormative kind of, like, here's the box, and says, oh, the problem is them over there. While there is such incredible hypocrisy of preying upon children, like, while then bashing, like, people who want to have a loving, committed relationship but are of the same gender, it's like, come on.
Yeah.
And I think that response, rather than those who seek to justify or to, that response is closer to something of the heart of Jesus and the heart of the Jewish prophets than any of the excuse making or the. I think for a lot of people, they've had maybe some experience, and it was a childlike experience. And, you know, childlike faith is a beautiful thing for children. Right? Like, and Chesterton talked about how there is a second naivete where you're able developmentally, and in terms of like spiral dynamics, which is a way of talking about almost the evolution of consciousness within different cultures, and in the same way we talk about developmentally a child grows up. If people don't have problems with religion, they certainly haven't spent any time with the Jewish or Christian sacred texts, because it's always the prophets that, like, Jesus has more time with the religious elite than anybody else. Like, it's fascinating in terms of, like, you know, talk of hell, whatever that means, which is a complete discussion. But Jesus is never talking to outsiders, people who don't understand themselves as, like, holding the keys to being on the inside. Never talks to outsiders to them about hell, which is how you hear it from some of the evangelists when you come home late on a Saturday and you turn TV on and there's, like, incredible American with this, like, hairdo that has caused a hole in the ozone layer because of the amount of, like, hairspray in it, and it's like there's hell for all these, like, the only time Jesus uses that, like, you know guerrilla tactics of Jewish apocalyptic literature is that those that understand themselves on the inside as pushing others out and they're not worthy. And so why is it that, like, the irreligious, they ran to Jesus, yet they run from those who claim to follow him? And so for me, I never
that's
actually...
Really,
don't you find that
really
fascinating?
That's
like,
really
for me, that's...
Because they're the ones... I heard it in something else that a chap was saying recently. They're the ones that stand between you and God.
Exactly. And prop themselves up. And, you know, if you're making a buck off it, like, you got to keep yourself in the game. So using guilt, so it's the stick or the carrot, it's a way to control people. And what more effective way to control people? Where do people feel more vulnerable than sexuality? I mean, how... literally naked. We feel naked, like
primary base energy.
That's right, and to manipulate that in such ways that doesn't actually make people more aware and go on the journey of what it is to take these energies and make it a safe and life-giving force for others that humanizes myself and others rather than a predatory kind of... It's like electricity. Like, you can power a hospital, you can light up a room, but if you take a fork to a power switch, you can also kill yourself or others. And so in response to that, people think, oh, we're just going to turn the power off. But it expresses itself like there are short circuits all the time. Like, it's what it is to be human. And the question is, can it be transformed in directions that become life-giving? But people want it cheap. You know, people find out the answer at the end of the book. And if we can fake kindness instead of actually learn what it is to be kind to ourselves and let that overflow in the life of others. And if we have no powerful experience that is bigger than the harm that has been done to us or the harm that we've done others, will often replicate that harm.
Yeah.
It might not come out in the same way, but it expresses itself somehow. And that's the work for all of us, of dealing with the cycles that we've stepped into that weren't of our creating. Will they be of our transforming?
Yeah.
And I think great spirituality, and I'm stealing all this stuff from Jesus. So, like, in terms of, it's all open source. Like, people can go and have a look at it. Open source. But the question of how this stuff gets transformed, how it gets transfigured, and what it is, and that's why words are so important in terms of the Christian journey of grace. It all starts with grace.
What does grace mean to you? And that,
yeah,
grace is a word I really struggle with.
I had this. I had my bike nicked.
All right.
So last 7 years I've lived out at First Home Project, where easy over 70 asylum seekers and refugees have lived there, developing a rental history. And so there's a lot of people that are coming and going, and I'm not paid to do that. That's just like how I've spent these number of years while I can, which has been beautiful, and I've tried to give it my all. And so there's a lot of people coming and going, and the power went out, and it was raining, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm trying to bring slides together for my sermon prep the next morning, and the power goes out, and I'm like, better turn the power on, even though it's raining outside. Walk outside, it's like pitch black, a lot of cloud coverage, couldn't see. And because there's a lot of people coming and going, on the vacant block that was a part of First Home Project, I looked out, and there's this dude with a bike, and I thought it was one of the crew that I live with from one of the other apartments. And I'm like, you right? And I see them in the dark move suddenly, and this white bike disappears in the opposite direction. I didn't realise it until that moment, but that was my bike. And so instinctively, I run up to the guy with my mobile phone, turning on my light, and I'm running towards him. I'm like, you right? And I get within a couple of metres and realise he's much bigger than me. Like, height's not my gift to the world, Bryn. And I'm like, what am I doing? This is completely stupid. I've cornered him. There's a creek, so he's got nowhere to go, and he's got my bike. And so in that moment, I go into my training of, like, how do we, like, de-escalate this situation? How do we make this safe? Okay, in this situation, it's not with riot cops, it's with a dude who is in a bad way and is stealing my bike. And we're having this weird conversation. It's raining, it's hard to hear. He's missing his front teeth. I can't really understand what he's saying. And I say to him in that moment, you're not stealing my bike. And this is going to sound really altruistic and all the rest. It was actually self-preservation and protection. Like, I'm not getting beaten up over my bike. You can have my... I said to him, do you know what grace is? And he goes, nah. And I'm like, oh, I thought that was like... And I said, grace is when we get not what we deserve, but what we need so we can be different.
Right.
And this weird interaction happened with this fella where I needed to get out of the rain, I needed to turn my power on. But I said to him, I've got a spare bed, like, under the veranda. It's an outside bed. I've got a spare bed on the veranda. And he's like, I know. I'm like, how do you know? And he's like, I saw it when I nicked the bike. I was like, right. So I can put clean sheets, and it's warm. I can get you something hot to drink, and get you some dry clothes, because I'd asked him and he said he didn't have a place to stay. And again, this isn't like, oh, this amazing kind of... It's just basic, like, how do I imaginatively and empathetically enter into this dude's story? He needed to pay back a drug dealer, and he thought the bike might be enough money. And as we're talking about it, he's like, maybe if there's any money left over, I can bring it back for you. I'm like, no, it's my freaking bike. Like, I don't want the excess once you pay that. Like, and so that's why I let go of my bike. And his response to that was, "You've called the cops. You're trying to delay me." I'm like, mate, I haven't called the cops. I'm just wondering if you need a place to stay. But grace, I think, is that power that actually gives us not what we deserve, but what we need.
Yeah.
And it's what we need to be different. Like, to think of the worst stuff in your life and my life that we don't want other people to know. What is it to realise that, like, for me, I can't hide any of that stuff from God. And yet there is a kindness that sees all of that. And yet deeper than my shame, there is a power that calls me out of that. Not to be a good person and try and do differently, but like, I see all of that. Deeper than that, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in you. And that you can be different. And I've seen that transform people's lives over and over and over again. And, God botherers like me are going to put it down to the power of grace, the power of the Holy Spirit. But maybe just that idea alone for people, when they allow it to impact them on that kind of gut level, maybe that's enough of a starting point for a lot of us. And I think conversations currently lack grace. I think the way we respond to one another lacks a sense of self-awareness of how much mercy we all need. I mean, we're all so tragic, and none of the stuff that we do that's messed up is all that creative. I mean, compassion is creative, right? Like, you see things and you're like, that's innovative. You've started that shelter for women in situation of domestic violence, and it runs a coffee shop on the side. That's a creative. But the things that we do that are bad, they're not that creative. There's nothing that people hear and like, oh, that's innovative. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's that flavour. We've seen that 1,000 times before. Yeah. But how do we find spaces?
A low energy response.
Yeah, that's right. How do we find spaces where, instead of self-propaganda games of like, I live on a different plane, actually like, no, it's all of us.
Yeah.
Because the irony for me in that situation is that my spirituality doesn't make me better than that guy. It makes me realise that I am that guy. That guy still in my bike. I'm with slightly different story, different parents, different side of town, different experiences. I would be in exactly the same situation.
Yeah.
And if we can tap into that mercy that is there for us and that dignity that is deeper than the things that have been done to us or the things that we do, I've seen it transform people's lives, and that's incredibly powerful and gives me a lot of hope for what's possible socially as well. So for me, activism is that grace that I've seen transform individual lives, seeking to see that transform, policies and society as well. How can that kindness become our way of operating, and then the way of organising society? I want love to be my politics. Like, the only political parties I'm interested in is the kind of parties that Jesus threw, where there's like sex workers and tax collectors and zealots, and yet they're all there not trying to, impress each other with religious games, but know that we're loved and we can actually be community together. And I see examples of that, and for me that's miraculous.
Are there any days where you just wish you could switch the activist button off some days? Does it ever get too much?
Yeah, totally.
Because you strike me as a person who opens yourself up to so much. And as I said earlier on, you'll, as I said, go there. And my own little way with the podcast, I go to a place.
Yeah.
But it's around my kitchen table and it's a microphone and it's pretty safe.
Yeah, it's great though.
But I go, well, it's not always the kitchen table.
Don't despise the small things.
No. But yes, even just considering what you do You know, even right down to getting yourself smuggled onto Manus Island and things like that, and opening yourself up to all the different people, all the different energy, all the different stuff. Are there any days when you just think, "Fuck, I wish I could just switch it off just for the day"? Wish I could just be, I don't know, content with just going to the pub and watching the footy for 3 hours.
Yeah. And for me, that's all part of it. We tend to think about individualized super saints, right? Or like amazing activists. Like, I met Desmond Tutu last year. For me, one of my biggest heroes. I quoted him the first time I ever spoke in church at 15 years old. For me, he's like a massive, massive deal. I'd been a Christian for like a year or so, and already he was on my radar as in terms of, this is somebody who I want to learn my desires from, to use the language I was using earlier. He had community, and he also had the poetry and the beauty of ways of expressing things that weren't his own. That's the gift of tradition. Not you have to do what you've done before, but it's jazz, it's improv. You learn your scales enough that you know where to go, that you can improv in the moment in such ways that I had my ancestors. Like I've just come back from Ireland, and I went to Lochmore, where St. Kevin was said to stand in the water until a bird made its nest in his hands, his compassion for animals. Anyway, like whatever you make of that, like I think it's a freaking awesome story. And but like there are traditions to draw on that means that compassion is possible, and part of that is actually lament. So for me, the problem is not when I let things in, it's when I don't let them out.
Right.
So I know for others it might be to let anything in at all. But I think prayer for me is living in this flow where I bring everything that I experience, and I give it back to the only one who can do anything with it, because I can't. And strangely find it's given back as a kindness to myself and others. But that's, yes, it's practice of learning to sit in the silence, but it's also a practice of learning to express things like, like if I'm faithfully to pray the Psalms, the Psalms say, "Where are you? Why are you asleep on the job? Have you fallen asleep?" Like, this is what the Bible says about God, that like we can challenge in prayer, like, why is there this injustice? Why is there this? And once I move past the anger, there is always a sorrow, there is a grief that is underneath it, and that's when you really start to tap into the alchemy of seeing our grief turn to grace, like to see our numbness be pierced by the pain of the world and realize it's not ours to hold, but it can move through us. And let it move through in poetry and song and dance and hanging out with friends, storytelling, and whether it's a pub or football or all these, there is no opportunity in life. This conversation right now is an opportunity to express that all that stuff is, and offer it up to be transformed. So I think actually holding on to that stuff is part of the self-care is as much about letting go as it is taking time away. Allowing stuff to pass through, and sometimes you need a little bit of spiritual Drano, because there's certain stuff, unforgiveness and bitterness that where
stuck in
you get stuck, and then when you're watching the news, what you're responding to, I'll let you in on this, Bryn. My sister had a baby on Saturday, which is amazing. My first niece, which is so incredible. Right. The horror of Friday with New Zealand started with the horror of a friend of mine who we've been through so much together, was found dead she'd been living in my aunt's apartment as a way of getting back on her feet, and she'd been doing so well. She'd been through rehab, and she has 2 degrees. She was brilliant and was working on her master's. And just 2 weeks ago, she tweeted to Father Bob saying, "When I was 13 years old, you gave me food and you gave me a place to stay, and you told me that God has a plan for my life. And now today, I've had 2 degrees, including law, a small business that is earning money, and I'm putting myself through further studies." And the tragedy of like the coroner's report and the reality of like it was accidental after a relapse with alcohol. And it's easy for that stuff to get stuck, Bryn. Like it's easy for that stuff to... And what it brings up about my best mate died of a drug overdose when I was 19, and for the last 15 years I've lived in such ways that I'm able to practice hospitality to people who are in a bad situation. So I've been able to open up my home because I've lived in communities with others where people who are homeless... That's why the story with the dude with the bike wasn't a big deal. I've literally done it hundreds of times before. Like, in the same way that people using Excel isn't difficult for them because they do it all the time. Yeah. I don't know what to do with Excel, but I do know how to welcome people who are having a hard time, and that's has been my practice. A mate who was murdered tragically after, he was working with the Australian government, responding to the realities of what was happening with the Taliban. He fled the Taliban, found safety here, and then just somebody with a mental illness with a knife just killed him. And some people are like, "Oh, it's easy for you, Jarrod, because like you got faith, which gives you all these answers." I don't have any answers. I don't have, like, Jesus asked 307 questions. What Jesus gives me is a bunch of questions. Like Jesus is the answer. What's the answer? Here's a bunch of questions. Oh, that wasn't on the bumper sticker. But they're questions that open us up instead of close us down.
Yes.
And with the tragedy of
find answers in us.
Yeah.
Not give. This is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got to work it out for yourself.
Yeah, it's if it doesn't involve our transformation, it's not the real work. Like there's not a cookie cutter kind of Jesus' response to different people is completely different.
Yeah.
So we should also expect that for ourselves. But I know I'm in a bad place, Bryn, if I allow that stuff to stick in me instead of weep. And so whether it's long bushwalks, or whether it's singing, or whether it's writing poetry, or whether it's like with my gorgeous wife Kat, just praying and talking about it together and weeping together, the stuff that gets stuck is the stuff that makes it hard for us to open up to other things.
Yeah. We
get clogged up. And so all of us need to find a cycle where we can...
So how did you transition through Friday through to Saturday?
I haven't. It's
start,
happening.
Yeah,
like it's
the start of your day, then hearing what happened in New Zealand, and then the joy of Saturday.
Yeah. Not well. In all honesty, anybody who saw my Twitter from the weekend, the amount of displaced anger I felt at people being angry at Egg Boy, is definitely about other stuff for me. Yeah, it's just classic transference. But I just felt, and I can give you all the rational kind of, like with the Dondale stuff, with the
push camp. It was coming from here,
but it's always what animates the things that we rant about, and can we actually diagnose that which lies behind. And that's harder because I'd much rather rage against the machine than I would weep over it. Yeah. But I find when I weep over it, that it's actually my tears that are the energy to actually seek to see change and know that change isn't up to me. My mum's incredible, and my mum with this friend, it's just hours on a daily basis, and for things to go so wrong in such a tragic way, and just talking with my mum about, I don't know who you've lost, I don't know who your listeners have lost, but our job is only ever to love. Transformation, I don't think, is ever our work. We can't transform ourselves, let alone anybody else. It's one of those things that just kind of, it happens as we do the work, and our responsibility is the work, and almost anything else is not our business.
Yeah.
Right. But it's the sense of powerlessness that comes with, guilt is a way of staying in power. If I had done this, and there's that's part of the grief cycle to ask those questions. Like, why didn't I ring? Or
because you think your phone call might have saved them.
Exactly. The things that people go through, because what we seek is a way to control, because we think control will actually give us security. But I mean, the ridiculousness of my faith, Bryn, is that what stands in the middle of my faith is a claim that God Almighty is all vulnerable. Like, the symbol of my faith is a cross. It's a symbol of capital punishment. And it says that through this self-aware, chosen, suffering love, transformation happens. And that is absolutely ridiculous, and it's a stumbling block, and it's foolishness. Unless even just poetically or metaphysics aside, you know something of the alchemy of love. And then you're like, yeah, okay, in terms of the God stuff, Jarrod, on your bike, but the love stuff does require vulnerability. Vincent Harding, who was a next door neighbour of Martin Luther King and one of my mentors, he said that this work takes humility. Jim Lawson, who actually trained Martin Luther King in his first ever nonviolent direct action, who has trained me, and I've had the incredible honour of running workshops with him. He talks about how nonviolence is the greatest power available to us, and all nonviolence is love organised. Wow. And people might think that's naive until you realise that you have no promise that it's going to work out right. Actually, how it works out is none of your business.
Yeah.
Just be faithful to do the work that actually creates a context where transformation could sprout and grow. And it's a strange letting go. Like, all we can do is our bit.
You should let go of all certainty or predictability or
certainty
control.
is the opposite of faith.
Yeah.
Faith requires trust. Faith is unknowing. Technically, philosophically, Christianity and Judaism are agnostic faiths. I can't talk for my Muslim friends and neighbours. But in terms of the traditions that academically I've studied, Christianity is an agnostic faith because it doesn't claim to have a special knowledge, a Gnostic kind of, it's an unknowing. And the reason that faith, or put maybe more in our vernacular, trust, why it all starts with that is because vulnerability requires you to just step out. And there's no way to love without risking the vulnerability that requires trust. But it's so damn hard, isn't it? It's not. It's just bloody hard work. Like, I'd much rather just throw eggs at fascists. Like,
make yourself feel better.
That's right.
What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for Jarrod?
It looks like being a good husband and dad, hopefully. That's
the hopefully bit is attached to which bit in what you've just said?
The good.
Right.
I have great models in my parents. They're extraordinary people, and the older I get, the more I appreciate. We need ordinary heroes.
Yeah.
The more I meet, people like Reverend Jim Lawson, who was with Martin Luther King when he was assassinated, and it was the reason why Martin Luther King was in Memphis, or Vincent Harding, or Desmond Tutu, I meet my heroes who have shaped my life from a distance, and they are ordinary. They're just ordinary folk like you and me. Like they're just like us, and yet they've thrown their whole life into their life not being about themselves, and into a story that is more beautiful than our individualized kind of success addictions. And so I hope, I don't know what it would look like. I was offered a job in Northern Ireland recently, and we're trying to work out what life looks like for us in this next season. Unfortunately, our first home project, which I've literally invested all I've had to keep it open the last 3 years. I was in court 2 weeks ago, and I am being forced to sell, which is another sense of like dying and letting go. It's sometimes harder to let go of the good and beautiful things. And so the next 3 to 5 years, a bit like sitting in between the death of a friend and the birth of a niece. I'm feeling so much, and it could go lots of different directions. But discerning with gorgeous Kat about what's her vocation, her calling, and what would be best for the boys, for them to grow up into well-rounded, grounded, funny young men that know their lives are to be lived for others, and somehow in doing that we find who we really are. That's core work for me. But yeah, I'm in this strange point as you catch me on this Monday morning, Bryn, of there's a lot of grief for me. Good grief. Grief that gives thanks for all that's been. And I don't know what's next. I had a job offer if I want to move to Cyprus. Kat's not into it. She's a school teacher. Yeah. And I don't think my vocation should trump hers, or vice versa. It's a discernment together. So we'll find something that works for both of us. But who knows?
It's exciting. Yeah.
As a mate said to me last night, you could never have imagined that first home project would have happened. So who can imagine what I might be called to next? So I'm just trying to live in that space of forgiveness, and making sure I'm doing the work of spiritual Drano, and getting the things out of the way that pain and joy can flow through me instead of get stuck. But it was the question I showed Kat when I got your little questionnaire that you send out to guests, and I showed Kat, and she's like, "Oh, good luck with that one," because I'm in a space where I honestly don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. What are some of the question I ask guests frequently? What are some of the things you do on a daily basis to keep you grounded, drained?
Should do or do?
Do. I don't need you preaching about what you should be doing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, which is the rule. You can't talk about it unless you do it. I should be going to the gym with my mates Millard and Mason, but I haven't been since my last 2 trips overseas.
Right.
And so I'm very aware that exercise is hugely important for my mental health, and with this stuff just going down, both losing first home project and losing a friend, I really need to. So Kat and I talked about it this morning, and we're going to start running together. But I shouldn't talk about that because we're not yet.
Yeah.
In terms of things that I do. Silence is a daily practice that keeps me well. Silence outside I find really helpful.
Silence meaning sitting there quiet, silently.
Do you know who John Deere is? Not the tractor.
No.
Father John Deere was nominated by Desmond Tutu for the Nobel Peace Prize, and like extraordinary guy, been arrested over 50 times resisting militarization, and he's incredible, he's inspiring, he's funny, he's quirky. I love it. We were speaking at something together, and somebody asked a question in a university secular setting about what sustains you. And thankfully, I didn't answer first. His response was, well, for 15 minutes each day, I sit opposite an empty chair. And I imagine Jesus, which is the most concrete place I see God as kindness, just sitting opposite me. And the way that he looks at me and loves me, I just try and sit in that. And then I try and live my day out of that 15 minutes.
That's strong.
I love John. He's such a good dude. And the reason why he's so like authentic and alive, and because you can tell when people are the real deal or when they're
You feel it.
Yeah, you can feel it. And he does that work. So for me, it is one of the most awkward spaces of my day. Not because there's anything wrong with Jesus. It's almost me, right?
Yeah.
Like it's because I have to sit with myself and the stuff that comes up. And the Thomas Merton, he joked about how sometimes in contemplative prayer, he was a Trappist monk, so he 5 hours a day in silence.
Yeah.
He would talk about how thoughts of burlesque would just appear. And the unconscious, the subconscious, it does, the way that certain memories of certain undealt things kind of come up, and it's the Drano for me. It's the kindness of the silence, which is present to me in every moment that I give time over to be present to the Spirit. That's really important. But I also do other daggy kind of Christian things, like I sing the Psalms daily, like as in I read the Psalms and just make up songs to them. And sometimes I that tune is completely inappropriate for how joyful these words are, or how depressing these words are.
Yeah.
So daily Bible study is really important to me, both singing psalms and imaginatively spending time in the Gospels. But exercise needs to be in there, and at the moment it's not. Yeah.
Needs to return.
Yeah.
Awesome. And my last question I ask guests, I know I'm intrigued to hear what you'll say to this, is if you could take one little nugget of knowledge or information and just upload it into that collective consciousness, everyone just got it. What would it be?
Oh, wow.
The answer to this normally comes where you sit there and go, well, if everybody just got this, everything would be fine.
We're loved. Bryn, at the deepest level, we're loved. And there's nothing we can do to be loved more, and there's nothing we can do to be loved less, but we are unfailingly and unconditionally loved. And any practice or any theories or any language or poetry that we put around that should lead us to that place of the humble realization that we are all loved. And I pray for your listeners more than anything else that they could know whatever they're going through at the moment, that they are loved. That and the left lane is not for overtaking, but those two things together, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. I had to do something. I'm Australian. Like, that was way too heavy and sincere for an Australian. Yeah.
Jarrod, it's been an absolute treat and pleasure to talk to you this morning.
Yeah, it's been great hanging out.
I've super enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for doing what you do, Bryn. This is important. Like, creating these spaces where we can hear each other. I know you were sharing about like how significant it's been for you, but it's significant for us as well. So thanks for taking this interest and passion and turning it into a gift for the rest of us, because it's awesome.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to come and find you, where do they find you?
The wonders of the interwebs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a Facebook page which is simply my name, Jarrod McKenna. Or there's Twitter, or there's Instagram. But
you're
I mean,
out
particularly if people are in WA, teaching pastor up at Sanctuary Church when I'm in the country, not trying to pay the bills by running workshops on activism overseas or preaching overseas or whatever. So people are welcome to hang out there, or I try and eat 3 times a day. Just find me and invite me over. I don't know. Here in WA, so it's easy.
Excellent. Jarrod, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks
Thank you very much.
Thank you.